So happy to be here with Shweta and Sandy, two friends and colleagues whom I've known for years. And we've kind of touched on, I don't know, maybe we've touched on politics a little bit here and there, but I know both of you have interesting experiences and thoughts on this. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your story because we haven't, officially talked about this. And I think the audience will enjoy hearing your stories and perspectives as well. So welcome everyone to another Mindful Politics episode. And as always, I'm going to start with reading the mission of Mindful Politics. So let me go ahead and find those notes here. So the typical political conversation is often callous towards the other side, seeing them as stupid, immoral, or both. And where our side, whatever that means to you, is smart and principled. And this is true on all sides. Everyone does this to each other, unfortunately, or often, that's what we see in the news anyway. So the aim of this show, Mindful Politics, is to provide an alternative that uplifts the audience and brings a deeper understanding of one another. And we will aim to model a political conversation that integrates compassionate learning about some of the popular issues so that we can all be wiser in our activism and voting. And selfishly, I started the show because I need to learn about a lot of stuff, and doing it with friends is much in this kind of container is much more fun. The hope is to present varying sides in the spirit of humble dialogue, so that we can understand more holistic solutions that allow us all to move forward together in a way that makes all stakeholders feel cared for instead of ostracized and pushed away. So I look forward to today's conversation. And as usual, we're gonna start with sharing the highlights of each of our stories in terms of how we arrived at this point to our understanding of politics, whatever that may be. For me, it's confused. And each episode I will share just a little bit about. I mean, some of you may have watched or heard the other episodes, and each episode, since I'm always going to be here, I'm going to share just a little bit something else about my story. So without further ado, I'm going to just see if my I'll start with my story and then give each of you an opportunity to respond. And I will be using a timer like the others. I'll give the others 4 minutes. I'm just going to give myself 3 minute timer just so we have a bit more time. And then each of you can respond with a minute afterwards. All right. So I guess what I can add to my political story is right now, my wife and I had we started out with very similar political, well, not very similar. We started out with similar political leanings when we first met. And I think I got a bit more libertarian over the years as I became more of an entrepreneur, and I don't want regulations on my business and all that stuff. So I naturally, I think this is probably why a lot of business people, entrepreneurs, and wealthy people want less regulations, like get your hands off my, money, my assets, my way of doing things and things like that. So I think over the years, my business experience has led me to want less government in my life. And then we were watching people like Seth Meyers, Trevor Noah, we were good progressives and voted, campaigned for Obama and all that stuff. And then the pandemic happened and Trump happened. And my wife and I I think due to the pandemic, and I think some of you have heard about how the certain more I guess more right-wing perspectives seeped into the holistic healing industry, and very very interesting, right? This whole thing. And so my wife and I, we ended up having quite divergent political views, and it was quite difficult on our marriage actually, during the 2020 year and a little bit into the 2021 year. But in my last minute here, I'll just say that obviously we're still married, still happily married, and we've had to learn to. I mean, the way my perspective is basically how we can have peace, and how can we have peace in the household that's much more important than what we politically believe in. That's more important to me because at the end of the day, how I'm not on the ground to know whether the election was stolen or unfair. I wasn't there for every vote. How can I prove anything? I'm not there to know. Sure, I believe in climate change, but I can't verify the science. I don't have enough. Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't know what the vaccines really do because I'm not a scientist. I can read scientists, I can listen to them, and I go, oh, the most scientists believe this, but I'm not there to verify anything. So ultimately, how can I know? I can't know anything other than just trusting what the masses tell me, what the majority opinion tells me to say this is true, this is correct, right? So therefore, 5 seconds to go, peace in the household is much more important than any of that. So that's my perspective right now, and I don't know. I really don't know. So I would love the responses from Sandy and Shweta. Let's see here. Whoever wants to go first, you can unmute and share anything that stood out to you or anything you want to say about that. And we'll start with Sandy. Sure. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Well, George, that was I could relate to a lot of that. What we discovered in terms of my husband and I in our relationship through the pandemic and through the whole from 2016 on is that we actually have very similar political views, but a lot of I'm in a place kind of like you where I'm a little bit confused, still trying to make sense of things, and my husband is very much uh, confident about his beliefs. I think he came from a family where his parents were Democrats, and they were older, and they went by the book, and even though he questioned some of that, he's very much right and wrong. And I'm more like, we live in a red state, even though we're in a little blue dot in the red state, and I'm very much about, I want to be open to understanding what happened, how did we get here,
Yeah.
what is this,
Right.
so our piece in the household is focused on finding this common ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I want to hear more as you share later. Shweta, anything you want response to what I just shared and what Sandy just
Yeah,
shared?
I mean, I always call it kind of the gift of COVID, right? The
Oof.
time. Uh, it
Yeah.
really helped to surface where people stand in so many different ways. And so, what you guys have been experiencing in your kind of intimate relationships, it brings out at an individual level, but then kind of at a society level, kind of the polarities
Yeah.
that may not have been as apparent before. And so for me personally, it was a lot of it can relate in the sense of in my holistic practitioner world, where, for me on my lessons in it was one, the first thing was like, what? You're gonna like be part of the agenda and and then stepping back a little bit of being just respectful and not judgmental of whatever people were choosing, but focused on the larger vision. Just like Sandy, you just shared of how you and partner were like, you kind of recentered to the question of not where each people stand, but the larger question of like, how did we get here, right? It's a bit more expansive. And so for me, it is about like, okay, for you, Georgia, was like about peace, right? It's like, how
Yeah.
do we preserve this larger, more long-term sustaining value or state of
Yeah.
being that could feed solutions or strategies, and being focused on, okay, not being judgmental, but be on freedom, on medical freedom, for example. And,
Right.
an
Yeah.
example for me in my scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that it is important. I think the expansive stand or being in that place of larger vision,
Yeah.
largeness
Yeah.
of what matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you. Well, why don't we go to Sandy next for your sharing of the highlights? Would that be okay? We'll do your 4 minutes now.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All
Let's
right.
see.
When you're ready.
Yeah, yeah, the highlights. I started my political voting life as being in the military. So, in a sense, without really understanding deeply uh, all of the nuances of that, I sort of went with the group, and voted fairly conservatively for most of my military life. And then, um, as I've evolved over the decades, uh, I've come to this place kind of like where you've been. I've been an entrepreneur for many, many years, and I've had this libertarian stance on, everybody needs to be make their own choices, personal responsibility, all of that. But at the same time, I've become over the years much more through, I guess, my spiritual growth, much more socially, socially open, socially progressive. So socially progressive, fiscally conservative. And then, COVID happened, and I'm looking at, like, yeah, fiscally conservative, but at the expense of what? That's where my questioning is at this point. It's like, at the expense of who? And if we're solely looking at, get your hands off my business, government, big government, or whatever, how does that affect those who are part of the fabric of our country, who actually need to have support on a larger scale? So that's where I am personally in my own questioning of, or my own evolution, I guess, of my political viewpoints. And of course, I'm still sitting in confusion around what's going on here in in my geographical area, and sort of remaining, in a sense, quiet, because I really want to hear and listen to what these seemingly divergent viewpoints are that have emerged over the last, what, since 2016, let's put it that way. So I see I have a minute left, but that's pretty much all I have to say at this point.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I guess Shweta, do you want to respond first? You,
Yeah, I mean, Sandy, thanks for sharing. What stands out is you and your question of like, well, at the expense of who, right? And it really, again, it kind of like, it brings up this polarized state of relating or thinking, behaving, the systems that are just polarized, when it kind of doesn't have to be that way in our thinking and our living. And so that's, I think, an important thing to unpack for me, of just a lot of what the underlying, that all the sharings thus far is like these dichotomies or these polarities that exist, but are getting possibly enhanced. And how do we not continue the divisiveness or the polarizing?
yeah, yeah. Thank you. So I guess what stood out to me, I appreciate you said, socially progressive, fiscally conservative, because when I hear someone say I'm a conservative or a liberal, I'm like, on what? There's like 1,000 issues that we could be more conservative, more liberal on. And so it is interesting, the label. Um, I feel like I've been politically homeless for a long time. and so it's like I live in California, but I live in San Francisco, and I used to be very San Francisco in my politics, and then over the years I've gotten more confused or more, and it's like it's interesting because because you talk about your local area, and it's like I don't actually interact with a lot of people in my local area, at least in terms of politics. So like I get most of my political education, I guess, online. Right? It's like these days we're all kind of this world of online, educate. Anyway, so thank you for your sharing, and yeah, I appreciate your being here. Um, Shweta, shall we go to you and have you share your highlights and things?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, so briefly kind of focus, I guess, on my journey of I guess external liberation work to external liberation work, internal liberation from external to internal. So I used to be a social justice immigrant rights community organizer for undocumented immigrants for a very long time. So my condition, since I was a teenager till my early 30s, and then the last decade or plus has been about the internal liberation work. And so kind of my framing is through my own personal experiences of being working against these political systems, at least the established ones, right? Like as we talk about party politics or what exists in the US right now as dominant politics, and really working against of how they're not for the people, and how they were established. And it goes back to colonialism. And so being in that world, I started to feel and understand, but not having the space to, because you're in martyrdom mode a bit more mostly. So, but you're burnt out. There's so many unrealistic expectations, personal drama, etc. But interestingly enough, what we were fighting against, we were also replicating, or at least I saw, or replicating in the social justice movement itself, like the patterns, the dynamics of behaviors, etc. And so, it was a really huge thing to step back from that world that I had identified with. It was my main identity. And so at a spiritual level, letting go of that huge identity was a big deal and a death. And to then just focus on my own healing process, which led me to focus on healing myself from a genetic disease that I have through the ancient wisdoms of Ayurveda, yoga, tantra, and a lot of the ancient wisdoms that are nature-based. And I started to see how what is really missing that I was craving from the politics or from political organizing are these principles of nature-based relating, and how nature works and how nature is organized and organically and naturally, miraculously is about living, right? About life. And how we're how these systems, current systems, are so disconnected from those laws of nature and living and imbibing those. Because if we look at a lot of different countries, and I'm not an expert at this or haven't researched deeply, but what I do know from the Vedic cultures and from India or from even Greek mythology and a lot of other different countries, there was a very holistic view of what leadership was and what the leader did and what their role was. They were almost like God. And so if we look back, but we've gone so much away from that because the colonialistic attitude was about individualism and about taking over and colonizing. And so I think kind of a lot of my framing of how I view politics, how I participate in politics comes now from a spiritual and more holistic nature-based view of kind of how I see what could emerge beautifully. As you both were talking about a lot of confusion, right? Of like you both have shared confusion, and I think it's the gift of confusion where that newness, new ways of thinking, and will emerge in different ways.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Well, I'll just share a little bit reflection. I love that you brought in this nature, these nature values, and also the idea of leadership, because it's like politics is essentially, yeah, people leading one another to get things done, right? And to collaborate so that we can make a better world. And it's like so often I feel like people who get into politics, whether they become politicians or they're like activists, I don't realize that they are leaders and they are modeling good or poor leadership, and they don't even like self-reflect and go, well, what kind of leader am I being? What kind of example am I being? What kind of values am I transmitting through my activism and my leadership? And it's like, yeah, I feel like that it's so important. So I'm glad you brought that in. Yeah. Sandy, anything you want to reflect on?
Well, what stood out to me, Shweta, was your journey of liberation, the external liberation to the internal liberation. And then, you really lit up some things in my awareness around systems and how our systems are just, these external systems are just not serving us as containers for where we're going, and there's this big disconnect. And I love that you brought in the nature-based things, because that's how I feel. I feel like we're getting back to who we are naturally, and that in this confusion, there's this seeming disconnect, but it's all moving us toward this internal liberation. And when we finally get that we have to liberate ourselves internally, then our systems are going to change to contain who we really are. So thank you for highlighting all of those things.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your perspectives and stories. So let's go. Usually at this point of the episode, I kind of bring up the document for Mindful Politics and we talked about the values. I feel like since we've done that in the last two episodes, maybe instead of doing that, we can use the time to talk more about the values underlying politics, and maybe our perspectives about it. And so I'm thinking, for the rest of this, for the rest of our time together, let's do another like a 4 minute, 2 minute type of situation. Basically, um, each of us gets 4 minutes to share, and then we'll wrap up with each of us getting 2 minutes or something like that. So I guess I'll start, and you don't have to use up all 4 minutes if you don't want to, but um so like recent like so the values that I came to it was with mindful politics, like, okay, humility, like it's kind of like I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to show up to a political conversation and say, you're right, I don't know, that's interesting, I never thought of it that way before, or I never saw that fact, or never saw that resource, or whatever it is, never thought of that situation, and I'm like, if I'm not willing to do that, then I'm only going to dig my heels into my side, and what's right. And it's the thing about like politics, especially these days, it's I think it's easy to find the validation for your views online. It's like whatever your views are, whatever it is, literally like all parts of the spectrum. You can, from the very left to the very right and everything everywhere else, you can find a pocket of some Facebook group or some Reddit thread or whatever. That's like people who believe in 100%, and they could even cite facts, right? Or whatever. So, and so humility, and then the appreciation was the second value. Appreciation is the willingness to give the feeling of the other person being valued and worthwhile, and their views and their experiences, because I feel like all of our views arise from life experiences and the people we've talked to. And for me to say to somebody, your views are wrong. I'm basically saying, I understand all of your experiences and all the conversations you've had in your life, and even your past lives experiences, perhaps. And having understood all that, you're obviously in crazy or something like that, where I I know nothing about most of the people I talk to. I mean, even the two of you, I mean, I'm hearing things here for the first time that even though we've known each other for a long time. So I might see some political position you take and make all these assumptions, you know. And so finally, like the third value of togetherness is, I think, with humility and appreciation, maybe we'll have a bit more togetherness to say, you know what, let's eh, coming back to the peace in the household, right? Like ultimately, like peace in the household, peace in the city, peace in the state, peace in the country, peace in the world. It's like if we can value that more than fighting each other for certain positions, or fighting gracefully, perhaps fighting with humility and appreciation, just like in a household, that would be great. I really wish that were the case. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, recently I've been reintroduced again, thanks to one of the previous guests, Eric Klein, on episode 2, reintroduced to the idea of spiral dynamics. And I had learned about it actually in college even, but then I lost it for years, and now I'm kind of coming back to it. And this idea of there's a psychological development among individuals and among societies, and the psychological development relates to how politics are in that individual and in that society. And it's like this idea of, we got to value every stage of the psychological development, and to include and transcend each stage. So rather than invalidate one oh, that was stupid when I believed that. No, no, no. You believe that. I believe that because of the experiences up to that point. Let me include that and transcend it to an even more holistic perspective. Anyway, so just a bit about sort of what I think on values. And so now I'd love to hear from both of you, either of you, on what values underlying your politics that really resonates with you. So um who wants to go first? How about Shweta? How about, yeah, great.
Yeah. So just to kind of connected with what you're sharing, so then let's say togetherness, what you're talking about. So for me, that kind of provokes around the value of like what we've lost, what I was sharing earlier around nature-based stuff. It's all about interconnectedness. And so the concept, which is a popular one, right, in our spiritual circles, whichever world you are, if you're in conscious business or spiritual, whatever modality, that we're all, it's safe to say that principle is honored, of interconnectedness. And so if we start to see each other at that level of like how we, not just as human beings, but that everything is like interconnected. Everything that's happening is, and we as souls are all interconnected. There's a reason why we know each other in this, and we've continued to be in touch in different ways. There's a reason for that. There's an interconnected that's constantly at play. And so versus getting into that mode of like, you're a Democrat or a Republican and just completely, or even these boundary state things. Like I'm in New York City and I don't have to identify with a man-made concept of a city or a boundary, because I am a soul, I'm a spirit, and I can start seeing people and state of life as interconnectedness, and then maybe that will ease up any divisiveness or judgments or things like that. So I feel like kind of implementing some of that way of being, I would feel can encourage that more togetherness or more open conversations and dynamics. And also help to kind of relate it, I guess, to the spiral thing. What is it called? Spiral
Dynamics, yeah.
dynamics concept. It is about transcending, right? So where it's about letting go of whatever happened, because as you were saying, everything feeds, the social conditioning feeds us, right? Past karmas feed us, all of that, the subtle stuff. Then there's like the social conditioning that makes us take a stand on something or on our values. But then are we able to kind of let go of that social conditioning of even racism and sexism and everything to really be in a place of I'm interconnected, and kind of what can we vision again and create, versus trying to even change old systems, because I think we're beyond that at this point. We really need to morph and transform, and which is why I like the term transformative politics versus mindful politics, which is when you first launched the idea. I was like, mindful, I'm like, we got to get out of our mind. Like, so let's be in a place of more transformation through interconnectedness, and letting go, and not just letting go of past stuff, but then being in a space of creation of like, what can we create, but through our own state of being and our own inner transformation, because that is critical. As a former community organizer, it was all about just the outside world, but not an inside out process. So we really need to be in a place of also inner change, inner work stuff for anything outer to change.
Mm, love that. Yeah. Thank you. Sandy, anything you want to share about values, principles with regards to your politics?
Yeah, well, I love what both of you have said, and you know, uh, I'm feeling like for me the underlying the ground substance, I guess, of transforming through the lens of my political views has a lot to do with like seeing, understanding, and coming to a place of, if not compassion, just neutrality, and really unpacking or deeply making sense of what's different. What is what's going on with this person's experience that is different from mine. And at least as you all were talking, what was coming to me is like me being in an area where for a long time, there were lots of Trump flags and lots of Confederate flags. There still are. There always have been in this area. The gift that I'm getting from that is being able to really see what's been under the surface. And I feel like that's valuable because it's always been there. It's just amplified and out there. And to see that, and to not to to do my own internal work, to not be necessarily triggered by it, or if I am triggered by it, to continue to do my own coming back to my own balance, coming back to my own center in the midst of things that are disturbing to me. It feels to me like that brings me into a sense of greater compassion and understanding, where solutions can be found, and for me it's so much easier, I think, to I've learned, when I get global in my politics, or more broad in my political views, I get into that judgmental space. But when I can come down to, okay, who's around me, who's my neighbor, how do we take care of each other, where are they coming from, how is that harmonious, where are those points of harmony where we can support each other, it makes me feel a lot more empowered, because I can do something about where I am here now with the people around me. But then I can also spout into the lofty, here's what's wrong with the world stuff. And that really, for me, it doesn't serve anything. It just serves my ego to think I have all the answers. So for me, I guess my values are around local, connecting, understanding, coming to a place of neutrality and compassion so that I can really be of service where I am. So,
wow, thank you for that. Awesome. Well, I think we have time for, if we could just do another round. I want to hear from, let's do another 3 minutes with each of us, if that's okay, so that we can reflect on each other's sharings and add anything sort of for our final round here. So I guess I'll start. Yeah, so I want to first of all, I want to, so grateful, the whole Shweta, you brought in transformative or transformational politics. I agree. The mindful politics, it has never quite sat right with me. I'm already in the logo design phase, unfortunately, but it's I guess it's more like gateway for people, because mindful is more understandable, and transformative people that might not get, but yes, coming into this, I think you're right. And just what, Sandy, what you said about like noticing our own triggers and finding the compassion for our neighbor, it's like that's the transformation that we all really need for a good society. And so the last thing I'll say, I mean, earlier I made my, I think I was talking about my wife's politics and suggested, she's probably some crazy QAnon person or something. But I want to dispel that belief. My wife is extremely smart, wise, and I've learned a lot from her and her politics over the past couple of years. Like, she has opened my eyes to things that, I mean, because I pride myself on being a science-driven, person all my life, and I'm always very like, I try to be like, oh, but what does the science say about this and that? And of course, science, we go to Wikipedia, or we go to whatever Google brings up, and whatever whatever CNN, I guess, says, right? It's supposed to be the authority in science, or whatever the government says, right? And over the past couple of years, particularly, I've been reminded of how mainstream science has been wrong on some important issues in human history, even in the last 50 years. I mean, very interesting. On a side note, like in the last year, like the whole UFO thing, suddenly the US government, right? Like US government has congressional hearings saying, yep, there's something going on now. They're calling it UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. So now they're saying, no, there's something going on. We can't identify. We don't know what it is. It could be alien. It could be not. And it's like it's scientific, and the laws of physics too have become, overturned in the past 20 years in various different, very deep ways. I mean, I catch little bits here and there. It's like, we don't even know what physics are. It's like, let alone we are certain the government position on this or that, or all these panels of scientists must be correct. Well, we have been overturned here and there over the years. So anyway, I'm just saying that I learn a lot from my wife, and I think the more we are open to learning from each other, well, that's what the point of this podcast and YouTube channel is. So I'm hoping, anyway, I'm looking forward to the continued learning. So with that, let me turn it over. Shweta, do you want anything else you want to share for this final round?
Yeah, it's amazing and it's beautiful that our conversation is happening a long weekend of Indigenous Peoples Day, or popularly known as Columbus Day, on Monday, right? So, and this is exactly where it connects to where on Monday where we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, where again, the values here was where the Indigenous led from. And we're all immigrants on this land. And they led from these nature-based laws of inviting in everyone, being in this, the way they tribal leadership in a lot of cultures, not just American Indigenous, but it was about, if you look at birds when they're migrating, they're in flocks, right? And so there's that sense of interconnectedness, that collaboration that's happening, that nature is teaching us, and they rotate and they reorganize not beautifully without no chaos. And these are the teachings that the Indigenous and a lot of nature-based traditions show us of what leadership is. And I think if people are just more aware of everything around them, how organic it is, because we can plant the seeds and create the conditions, then things will bloom at its time, right? And so I think, like Sandy, what you were sharing around, where am I? That question of, well, there's no formulas. Like evidence-based science is so linear, and nothing in life that's related to liveliness and life is linear, right? So it depends on your condition, the now state. And I don't think that's being considered in politics at all. It's like everything is just built off on the past, but what is happening now? Like what is the conditions now, the state of the physical space, but where people's consciousness is, like all of that need to be considered for future change or future systems that need to be created. So I think just honoring the Indigenous people this weekend, their ways, is what we do need, or any nature-based, that is what we need to be leading with, is not the current thing of like, oh, individual, like I'm a leader, but you're only looking after your own agenda, your own ideas, right? Which is, it's not collaborative like in nature at all. It's about protecting your God. You're almost like God. You're protecting everybody. You're seen as your own father, family member, and that's what leaders did, or kings in India were divine. They were protectors, and they had a certain specified role that was about the larger service to everyone. And they were required to sacrifice their own stuff for the protection of the people. And I think that those are some of those things that are just missing. And, Indigenous values or nature-based values that's just what needs to, I think, we should be leading with more.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sandy, you get the last word. Here we go.
I'm very, I feel like I've been so enlightened and expanded through this interaction and this conversation. It's thank you for opening up this forum. And Shweta, what you've brought through about looking at Indigenous values and getting back to connection with nature, that really dovetails a lot into the work that I do in terms of showing people how they are designed and created to be these individuals, and that's what I kind of see with this transition, this transformation that we're making, and how we're exploring it through politics in particular, is that we're all becoming, and nothing is certain, nothing is certain, and I think the only thing that's certain is what we know inside of ourselves, that's connected with our inner nature, that's also connected with the bigger part of nature. And everyone's perspective about, or everyone's experience with that, is different, because we're all in different bodies, and maybe that's what we're moving toward, and what our politics is moving toward, is really being congruent with our own natures, with our authenticity, with what our bodies are telling us, whether it's, you know, to do the next big thing that the government is recommending for our health, or not, but coming from this place of sovereignty within our own knowing, having that self empowered self leadership that is also based in how does the natural order of things really work, you know? So yeah, and then all of this chaos and confusion perhaps is just the sorting out or coming to grips with, you know, there's no uniform external pattern. You know, that some artificial government or whatever is you know, that we can follow from this artificially created thing that we've collectively created from our minds, so that we can set up opposing sides and opposing viewpoints and fight against each other. Maybe it's just about this internal, as you said, Shweta, this internal liberation that brings about the liberation of the external.
Mm. Great way to close the conversation. I would actually invite each of you 30 seconds if you want to say a bit about your work outside of politics. I welcome that, and just so I can model it myself, I'll do the timer myself. I think most of you know what I do but anyway, if you don't, I call myself an authentic business coach. What that just means is I'm trying to bring this principle of authenticity into entrepreneurship, particularly for people who are solopreneurs. And I teach online courses on marketing and productivity, trying to weave in this idea of an authentic life into all of that. So that's what I do. Shweta, do you want to say a bit about your work?
Sure. I am the CEO behind and creatrix behind Guts to Your Living. It's digesting food, thoughts, and emotions for bold, intuitive living. And maybe I'll add transformational politics to that as well. Because at the end of the day, as chemical, as Sandy, you were sharing about the matrix, this inner matrix. So in Ayurveda, if the right enzymes and hormones aren't secreting in its natural rhythms, we get confusion, we experience XYZ things, or away from harmony, whatever that looks like for one's being. So I support people in harmonizing their inner systems for thriving life outside.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Sandy, and your turn.
Yeah. I guide people with a system of human design and creative processes to get in touch with their true nature, how their nature operates, their energy operates, and also with their activating their own creativity and their own intuition, so that they can better trust themselves as they make decisions and expand into a higher or more expansive version of who they are.
Great, great. And for those interested, you know, you could see the links for both Sandy and Shweta below this video or this podcast episode, the show notes. So thank you so much both for being here. It's such a pleasure to get to kind of talk to you in this way. And to please stay online. We'll talk a little bit after the recording. Guests or audience members, future guests perhaps, but audience members, thank you so much for listening to this, watching this. Really open to your feedback as well. This is a collaborative effort. This is a bit of a democracy. Yes, I'm a dictator right now, but I'm trying to aim this to be a more of a representative democracy here. At this show. So if you have any feedback, suggestions on how I can do things differently here, we can do things differently, or ideas to contribute, resources to share, we'd love to see your comments. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.